Hello, everyone. I'm Xueji Wang from Purdue University, and today I'd like to talk about some recent works from our group about using thermal emission spectroscopy to probe phonon polaritons in Boron nitride nanotubes. First of all, I would like to start from some basics of thermal radiation. As we know, thermal radiation is everywhere. All objects at non-zero temperatures will emit electromagnetic energy. The power density of thermal radiation can be described by the emissivity and the black body spectrum. For the black body spectrum as shown in the figure, it is determined by the Planck's law. It is spectrally broadband. It is also unpolarized and omnidirectional. So the distinctive features of thermal radiation is really encoded in the emissivity. For the emissivity spectrum, there is one very important rule, which is Kirchhoff's law. Kirchhoff's law states that the emissivity should be equal to the absorptivity. The Kirchhoff's law really connects the field of photonics and thermal radiation engineering, because on one hand, by engineering the optical absorbance, we can achieve effective control of thermal radiation. On the other hand, by measuring the thermal radiation, we can probe both the optical and thermal properties of different systems. Coming to the next slide, I want to show some good examples of the works in this field. People have studied many interesting physics in thermal radiation. For example, the thermal radiation from grating structures can be highly directional and narrowband because of the diffraction. And the thermal radiation from photonic crystals can be strongly surprised inside the band gap and get enhanced at the frequencies of photonic band. And another very good example is metamaterials. Metamaterials really generates a lot more freedom. The thermal radiation from metamaterials can have many unique features from different kind of mechanisms. And recently, our group proposed and experimentally demonstrate the optical topological transitions in ENZ and hyperbolic materials can also lead to very unique thermal radiation patterns. But for today, I would like to focus on the thermal radiation of polaritonic materials and the thermally excited phonon polaritons in those materials. Polaritonics are one of the most important material system for thermal radiation engineering, because their optical phonon polariton resonance frequency are lying in the mid-infrared region, which is a central region for thermal radiation. And as we can see in the figure, the frequency is very different from the plasmonic resonance in metals and doped semiconductors. And another very important feature of polaritonics is that they are generally high temperature stable. So the thermally excited, the phonon polaritons can be thermally excited. We don't need, but can be thermally excited by heating the samples to high temperatures. We don't need any other complicated excitation techniques like fast electron excitation, optical coupling, or quantum excitations. So to demonstrate this, we established an unresolved thermal emission spectroscopy setup in our lab. In this setup, our samples are mounted inside a high temperature vacuum chamber, and the thermal radiation signal is detected by a Fourier transform infrared spectrometer. With this setup, we can really do a lot of things related to thermal radiation and phonon polaritons. For example, we show the thermally excited surface phonon polaritons in silicon carbide by measuring the thermal radiation spectrum. We can also study the temperature dependence of the optical phonon properties by measuring the wavelength shift of the thermal emission peaks. And most importantly, we can show the energy momentum dispersion of the phonon polaritons by measuring the angle-resolved thermal emission spectrum. And for today, I would like to discuss one very important material, the hexagonal boron nitride. HBN is an anisotropic material with two permittivities along the perpendicular and the parallel direction of the 2D layers. And in addition to its high temperature stability, HBN has another very important feature, which is the optical phonon frequency of HBN are the highest among all dielectric materials because of the small atomic number of boron and nitrogen. So HBN really extends the available wavelength range for the applications of the optical phonons in polar dielectrics. And another very important feature of HBN is that it's a nitro hyperbolic material with both type of optical hyperbolicity. The two permittivities of HBN has two different rest-Trollin bands at different wavelength region. At the first band, it's a type 2 hyperbolic material, and at type, the second band, it's a type 1 hyperbolic material. As a result, if we calculate the local density of states near a flight HBN emitter, we can see two strong peaks. But if we increase the distance from the flat surface, these two peaks will decrease. That means these two modes are dark modes, which cannot be observed at the far field. So just like graphene and carbon nanotube, by rolling the HBN into tubular geometry, we get boron nitride nanotubes. Boron nitride, the unique 1D structure of boron nitride nanotubes works as a thermal antenna to couple the near field dark modes into free space. So it will lead to enhance the thermal radiation at the far field. So on the right side, right-hand side is a SEM image of the disordered boron nitride nanotube system we used in our experiment. And coming to the next slide, we show the thermal emission of boron nitride disordered boron nitride nanotube system. We can see three strong peaks inside the two bands we just talked about. And to figure out the mechanisms of these three peaks, we calculate again look into the unique 1D structure of boron nitride nanotubes. We found that these three peaks are corresponding to the tangential, longitudinal, and the radial buckling phonon modes in boron nitride nanotubes. And these three peaks can be very well predicted by the mean-series calculation of the absorption cross section. And we also measured the temperature dependence of the thermal radiation spectrum, and we can see a very small right shift of the tangential and longitudinal mode in the thermal emission spectrum. We attribute this wavelength shift to the thermal expansion of the nanotubes. And finally, we show a very interesting thermal antenna effect in this disordered system. As we increase the emission angle, we can see the thermal radiation of the L mode is decreasing. Even in we can explain this thermal antenna effect by the following: like even the nanotubes are in a disordered system, there is still 1 degree of quasi-order, which is almost all the nanotubes are lying in a same 2D plane. There is no nanotubes standing vertically on the substrate. So the thermal radiation of the L mode can be seen as the radiation of a dipole along the longitudinal direction of the nanotube. We know the radiation pattern of the dipole. It will decrease towards higher angles. So the thermal radiation of L modes will also decrease towards higher angles. But because of the rotational symmetry of the nanotubes, the tangential and the radial buckling modes will be unchanged. And this is my last slide. I want to provide some take-home messages. First of all, we show that angle result thermal emission spectroscopy provides a new platform to study optical phonon polaritons in polar dielectric materials. And secondly, we show the thermally excited optical phonon polaritons in boron nitride nanotubes introduce unique features in their thermal emission spectrum. And finally, we found that due to the distinctive 1D structure of boron nitride nanotubes, the thermal emission spectrum shows an interesting thermal antenna effect. And with this, I would like to thank our funding agency and our collaborators. I would also like to thank the audience, and please get in touch with us if you have any questions.